Welcome back to the Word on Fire show, where we proclaim Christ in the culture. I'm Brandon Vaught, the host, and usually Bishop Robert Barron is with me, but once again, he's out of the studio today, so we're going to finish the episode that we started last week. Last week, we played the first half of Bishop Barron's talk titled The 7 Keys to the New Evangelization. It was the keynote talk that he gave at the 2014 Los Angeles Religious Education Congress, and it remains his most popular talk of all time. It's the most viewed, the most listened to talk on our website, and it's fantastic. I think you're going to love it. We looked at the first 3 keys of the 7 last week, and today we'll round it out with the final 4. So sit back and enjoy these keys on how to carry out the new evangelization.
We're moving along. Number 4, to be a good evangelist, you have to tell the great story. You have to tell the great story. Here's a line from N.T. Wright, for my money, the best biblical scholar in the world today. N.T. Wright said, on both the Protestant and Catholic side, much of the Christology of the last 200 years has been Marcionite in form. I know, very technical, but here's what he means. Remember back in the 2nd century, there's this heretic called Marcion. Marcion presented a version of Christianity in abstraction from the Old Testament. Get rid of the Old Testament. That's this fallen God, the violent, anthropomorphic God. Get rid of that, and we present the pure version of Christianity in abstraction from the Old Testament. And so what did Marcion give us? He gave us Jesus, the Gnostic guru, right? Teacher of the timeless truths of Gnosticism. May I suggest that temptation exists up and down the Christian centuries to the present day. Now, look at the Christologies of people, go back to Friedrich Schleiermacher in the 19th century, the founder of liberal Protestantism, come up in the 20th century, Tillich and Rahner, Teilhard de Chardin, many others, people whom I reverence, whom I've read for years and reverence. But here's what strikes you about them when you read their Christologies, and you see N.T. Wright's point. You can go through the whole Christology of many of these people and see nary a reference to the Old Testament. Something's gone haywire when we present that sort of deracinated, de-Judaized Christology. Jesus is presented in the Gospels as the fulfillment and culmination of the great story of Israel. And when we abstract him from Israel, he loses his evangelical punch. Now, let me try. Yes, thank you. See, we're the new Israel, the church. We forget who Israel is. We don't know who we are. We can tell the basic story in many ways. Let me try one version. God creates his beautiful world. He puts his human creatures in a garden. What does that rich symbolic language mean? It means that God wants us to be fully alive. The church fathers saw the trees in the garden as evocative of all the great things in life: science, art, literature, friendship, philosophy, sexuality, relationship, conversation, all the great things of life. That's what God wants us to enjoy. God wants to be king of this garden, but he wants to use us, his human creatures, as viceroys. That's why we're made in his image and likeness, so that we can have the privilege of governing with him this beautiful world he's made. To ensure, listen now, that this world is a place where love and peace and forgiveness and compassion and nonviolence hold sway. That's our job as the viceroys of God's beautiful kingdom. So what's sin? Sin, you might say, is a failure in leadership. A failure in this stewardship. Instead of assuring that God's beautiful creation is maintained as a place in accord with his mind and heart, we allow it to fall into all the familiar forms of dysfunction. Now, read the first 11 chapters of the book of Genesis, and you'll see it laid out in beautiful, laconic form. Murder and hatred and violence and rivalry and corruption and all of it on beautiful poetic display, all the permutations and combinations of human dysfunction. You know where it comes from? From bad stewardship. We didn't tend the garden well in accordance with God's mind. So what did God do? He called the people. Read through the first 11 chapters, then come to chapter 12, the call of Abraham. He calls a people, Israel, and then shapes them after his own mind and heart, teaching them to think as he thinks, to feel as he feels. Think here of the great pathos of the prophets. It was Heschel who said long ago that the prophets feel the pathos of God. Beautiful. He teaches the people to think as he thinks, feel as he feels, to govern as he would govern, to worship him as he wants to be worshiped. That's the holy, kingly people, Israel. Now, what's the hope? The hope is that the whole world would eventually be attracted by the sheer beauty and integrity of Israelite life. They'd be drawn under the headship, under the kingship of Israel. Think here of Isaiah's great vision. Mount Zion, the true pole of the earth. There, all the tribes go up, the tribes of the Lord. That means all the tribes of the world coming again under the kingship of God, making the world a place that is Edenic in its love, compassion, forgiveness, nonviolence. Where the lion and lamb lie down together, where the swords are beaten into plowshares and the spears into pruning hooks. You see the beauty of that imagery? This is the recovery of Eden, which is now the work of Israel. God raises up kings, doesn't he? People like Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Abraham, Moses, Joshua, Samuel. Paradigmatically, David. David who gathers the 12 tribes, who rules over a rightly ordered Israel, who leads them in right praise. David becomes the paradigmatic king of Israel, who is now destined to become the king of the world. But David falls, as do all the kings. And so Israel dreams, hopes, longs that a definitive David would come. That one day a Mashiach, anointed as David was anointed, would come and rule over Israel. The Gospel of Matthew, recounting the genealogy of Jesus, lays out 3 sets of 14 generations. Remember? What's 14? But the number in Hebrew that corresponds to Dawid, David. Matthew says, David, David, David is coming. The definitive David. Where is he born? In Bethlehem, the city of David. What does this new David do? But he gathers 12 apostles, indicative of the 12 tribes of Israel. And then he reaches out to the marginalized in his open table fellowship, reaches out to Zacchaeus, to the man born blind, to the woman at the well. Look what he's doing. He's gathering Israel in, creating a new Eden. What does he teach them? Love, compassion, forgiveness, nonviolence. Someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn and give them the other. Someone takes your coat, give them your shirt as well. Someone presses you into service for a mile, go with them too. He's shaping a new Israel. At the climax of his life, this Davidic king comes into Jerusalem as a conquering warrior. And yes, there he does battle. But not in the worldly way, not fighting fire with fire, not an eye for an eye, making the whole world blind, but rather Jesus fights the powers of the world through the power of the cross, taking upon himself all of human dysfunction and swallowing it up in the ever greater mercy of God. And that's why at the resurrection, what's revealed is that God's kingship has been established. The kings of the world are not the final say. They're not the final power, but rather God is, expressed, listen, in his great Davidic viceroy, Yeshua from Nazareth. And that's why the first great evangelist in the Gospels is Pontius Pilate, who with supreme delicious irony places over the cross, which is the symbol of worldly power, a sign that says, Jesus Nazarenus Rex Judeorum, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. And lest anybody miss it, Pilate insisted it be in Hebrew and Greek as well. You see what he's doing despite himself? Sending out to the whole world a new message. There's a new king in town. And it's not Caesar or any of his allies or any of his successors down through the ages. It's this Jesus, the new David, who is himself the embodiment of God's kingship over the world. Eden, the new Israel, has been established. Now, good. That's the story. What's Paul's message? Paul that knew all these things I'm talking about in his bones. Paul who studied at the feet of Gamaliel, the prophet, the rabbi. Paul knew this story. What's his message? It's in every one of his letters. It's in every one of his sermons. Jesus Kyrios, Paul says. Jesus is the Lord. We say, well, yeah, that's nice spiritual talk. That's not nice spiritual talk. That's a revolution. See, because the watchword of the time was Kaiser Kyrios. Caesar's the Lord. You see how subversive Paul is and why he spent so much time in jail. They knew what he was saying. Not Caesar, but Jesus, someone that Caesar put to death, but whom God raised from the dead. He's the king. And now, everybody, it's time to join his kingdom. This new order of peace and love, justice, compassion, nonviolence. Everybody needs to be in this new order. That's evangelization. It's the exact same message today. It's the exact same message and call of evangelization. The trouble is, when you deracinate Jesus, you de-Judaize Jesus, you present him in abstraction from Israel, what does he become? One more spiritual teacher among many. You know, he's like a lot of spiritual teachers up and down the ages. So if you like some things Jesus says, great, but if you prefer, Deepak Chopra, I shouldn't badmouth Deepak Chopra out here in California. And the thing is, honestly, I'm not bad-mouthing Deepak Chopra. I think a lot of what he says is fine. But that's not evangelization. Timeless spiritual truths or psychological insights. Evangelization is there's a new king in town. This subversive message. All right, there's the great story. Oh, here's a last thing about that. A couple years ago, I was at a confirmation, and the very good, nice pastor of the parish got up, and he said to the bishop, "Bishop, I give you a class of students who are really dedicated to service." And what I was thinking was, that's great. I'm totally in favor of service. But a class of good Hindus, good Buddhists, good Jews, good Muslims, even atheists of goodwill, could all be dedicated to service. That's not what's distinctively Christian. I would have been thrilled, actually, if the pastor had said, "Bishop, here's a class who knows what it means to say Jesus Christ is Lord. Bishop, here's a class that knows the whole history of Israel and why Jesus is its capstone." Now, people say to me, "Hey, Father, come on, the kids can't learn the Bible with all these weird stories and strange names." Let me tell you a story. A couple years ago, there's a great lady who works at Word on Fire, and she has a daughter who at the time was 8 years old. And she loves Star Wars. And so her mother said to her, "Hey, Josie, tell Father Bob about Star Wars." So this 8-year-old kid stood there and recounted to me the entire Star Wars story. Episodes 1 through 6, right? And, I got a basic grasp of Star Wars. I can handle Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader and, all that. Oh, she was way beyond. She was into Count Dooku and Oogie Woogie and the whole bit. What occurred to me as she's telling the story is, don't tell me kids can't understand the Bible and can't deal with the strange, they can do Star Wars. Gosh, we underestimate kids. We really underestimate kids, I think. Okay, I might not get through all 7 here. Let me do, I mentioned St. Irenaeus already, and I want to say something now about him, because I think his doctrine of God is so important for evangelization today. St. Irenaeus, a 2nd century figure, died around the year 200, probably as a martyr. Bishop of Lyon in southern France now, though he's from the east, from Turkey. He was a student of Polycarp, who was a student of John. So Irenaeus is very close to the apostolic period, and he always tells us that in his writings. He got this from Polycarp, who got it from John. Here's the key note of Irenaeus' doctrine of God. God does not need us. That's such good news. Now, why? It means that God utterly loves us. See, look at it, a lot of the ancient gods and goddesses who have a great need for the world. When you need the world, you start manipulating it for your purposes. But see, God is God. God is absolute. God is perfect. God has no needs outside of himself. And that means that whatever exists outside of God has been loved into being. Because love means willing the good of the other as other. Such an important point. Teach your kids that. It's not the indirect egotism most of us engage in, like, I'll be nice to you that you might be nice to me. That's not love, but that's indirect or subtle egotism. To love is really strange, because it means to want the good of the other as other. That's all God can do. That's all he knows how to do vis-a-vis the world, because he has no need of it. Now, here's the implication. And it's Irenaeus' great one-liner. If you know one thing from him, you probably know this. The glory of God is a human being fully alive, right? Gloria Dei homo vivens. The glory of God is when we are fully alive. God's not a rival to us. God's not in competition with us. God's not trying to get something out of us. All God wants is that we be alive. And that's why Irenaeus also said, Deus fit homo, ut homo fieret Deus. God became human, that humans might become God. That means sharers in the divine life. There's the gospel in a nutshell. Listen to me. There's no greater humanism possible than Orthodox Christianity. You see what I'm driving at? That God became one of us that we might become sharers in the divine life. There is no philosophical system, no economic system, no point of view that proposes a more profound humanism than that. Now, why is it so important to emphasize this today? Because the new atheists, who are new really only in their mean-spiritedness, they're reviving the arguments of Feuerbach and Marx and Sartre and everybody else. The new atheists, like the old atheists, maintain consistently that God is a threat to human flourishing. Think of Karl Marx, says you got to get rid of God if you want to prosper economically. Think of Freud. You've got to get rid of God if you want to be psychologically together. Think of Sartre. You've got to get rid of God if you want to be truly free. You see, friends, how all the atheists, old and new, are laboring under a deeply false conception of God. God has no need of the world. God has no need to put down the human project, just the contrary. Gloria Dei homo vivens. Here's a biblical image for this. Moses sees a bush that's on fire but not consumed, right? That's how the God of the Bible appears. Look at the old myths, Greek and Roman. When the gods break into human affairs, what happens? Things blow up. People are incinerated. When the gods break into the human project has to give way. Then there's the Bible. The bush is on fire, but not consumed. When the true God comes close, he makes us radiant and beautiful and does not destroy us, compromise us. And don't we say indeed about Jesus that in him two natures, divine and human, come together, but in such a way that the humanity of Jesus is not compromised, but rather enhanced. Jesus himself is the burning bush. Fellow Catholics, this is our great doctrine of God. And now if you listen to the atheists, and boy, again, they've grabbed the next generation. These young kids, they parrot Hitchens and Dawkins all the time. We've been bad, it seems to me, at communicating truly who God is, the great friend of the human project. Okay, I'm at number 6 now. We go from Irenaeus to Augustine. 5? What did I skip? We got, all right, hang on now. We got lead with beauty, right? We got don't dumb down the message. We got preach with ardor. We got tell the great story. And we got Irenaeus. That's 5. So now 6, huh? All right. Who cares? Who needs outlines? The second to last, I'll put it that way, is stress the Augustinian anthropology if you want to do evangelization today. Now, what do I mean? Augustine, again, give him to our kids. Don't give them pablum or comic books. Give them Augustine and everybody, all the other great figures. On page 1 of the Confessions, page 1, you find the single greatest line of Christian anthropology ever written. Here it is. Lord, you've made us for yourself. Therefore, our heart is restless until it rests in thee. There's no greater statement of Christian anthropology anywhere in the great tradition. Lord, you made us for yourself. Everybody in this room, everybody in this world is wired for God. And that's why our heart, how beautiful, by the way, Augustine puts that in the singular. He doesn't say our hearts are restless. He says our heart. Because despite all of our differences in background and ethnicity, etc., you know what draws everybody in this room together? We all have a hungry heart, as Bruce Springsteen said, right? Everybody's got a hungry heart. Not just you, not just everybody's got a hungry heart. You too, what did they say? I still haven't found what I'm looking for. Right? I've climbed every mountain. I've swum the seas. And I still haven't found what I'm looking for. That's because you're looking for God. Everybody is. We don't just want individual truths. We want the truth itself. We don't want just particular goods or acts of justice. We want justice itself. We don't want just particular beautiful things. We are hungry for the beautiful itself. Everybody's wired for God. To evangelize, I think, good. To evangelize is to tap into that, remind people of it. Here's your biblical image for it. Remember in the first book of Kings, the great story of Elijah and the priests of Baal, the challenge he gives them on Mount Carmel, remember? How many priests of Baal are there? 450? How many prophets of Yahweh? 1. So it always goes, by the way, up and down the centuries. The avatars of the false gods are always thick on the ground. They are today. See, we need to be in that fight, everybody, as Elijah was. So Elijah says, look, you guys build altars to your gods, and then you call on them, and I'll build an altar to God, and we'll see who wins, right? So the priests of Baal erect their altars, and then they hop around them and dance around them, and they pray, and they beg, and they cajole. No fire. Elijah deliciously mocks them. Well, where are they? They're gods. I don't know, maybe they're on vacation. Maybe they're taking a nap. Or they say, the Hebrew even suggests, maybe they're in the jakes, they're in the bathroom. I don't know where they are, but they're not coming. At which point they hop and beg more furiously, even to the point of taking knives and slashing themselves, remember? Till the blood flows. And still there's no answer, there's no fire. Then Elijah calls upon Yahweh, the true God. The fire comes down, consumes the sacrifice. He wins. Okay. There's much more here than just, I got a bigger God than you do. What point's being made? Think, everybody, of the priests of Baal as evocative of all of the errant moves of the sinful heart. The heart that seeks God, but seeks Him in wealth, seeks Him in pleasure, seeks Him in power, seeks Him in honor, all the worldly goods. What happens? What happens? First of all, no fire will ever come because those things are not meant to satisfy us. But more to it, as the fire refuses to come, we become frenzied and addicted. Sound familiar, fellow sinners? We're all addicts. Chesterton said we're all in the same boat and we're all seasick. Isn't that right? We're all addicts because we tend to hop around these phony, false altars, even to the point, yes, of harming ourselves. The church needs to be in season and out, the new Elijah, who publicly and vigorously challenges the priests of Baal, because as always, they are thick on the ground. Look at every book, magazine, watch most movies, listen to much music. What are our young people taking in? They're taking in this dangerously erroneous view that you can become happy by filling yourself up with wealth, pleasure, power, and honor. What do we know? We know the deepest truth is you'll be happy only in the measure that you fill yourself with God, and that means give yourself away in love, right? That's the message. But see, it's not just for us. That's the thing about the church. Vatican II and the church. The church is meant to be the light to the world. If we just privately whisper among ourselves these spiritual truths, we're not fulfilling our evangelical mission to be new Elijahs even today. Taking on, yes, even mocking if we have to, the priests of Baal. That's a big part of evangelization. Okay, let me do just one more, then I promise I'll stop. So number 7, I guess, or 6, whatever. Well, 7's more biblical. We'll call it 7. Lastly, to use the new media. Now, I hope you've noticed something. I put this last, and I put 6 things before we get to the new media. I'm the rector of Mundelein Seminary, and a lot of my students, are very interested in doing the new media and doing evangelization with the internet and YouTube and Facebook. And I always say to them, before you even think about the new media, become very adept at the old media of books. Books. Content matters. If we just kind of rush out there into the media world and we don't have something to say, what's the point? Immerse ourselves, and here again, the teachers, publishers, catechists, preachers, to immerse our young people in these great themes of the tradition. Okay, having said that, yes to the new media. I totally get all the problems. I see them every day. Superficiality, impersonality, the virtual versus the real. All that is true, I grant it. But we would just be, it seems to me, horribly derelict if we did not use these tools given to us. Think of Fulton Sheen, I'm putting some stained glass windows in the chapel at Mundelein, the students' chapel, and sort of heroes of the new evangelization. And I want one of them to be Sheen, because talk about, the trailblazer in the use of new media technology. But how sad that after Fulton Sheen, we largely dropped the ball. And I think just now, Catholics are getting back into this game that he pioneered. But listen, we've got tools now that Fulton Sheen would have given his right arm to have. He had to rely on people tuning in at a particular time or listening to the radio at a particular time. Now, put something on YouTube like that, 24/7, all over the world. Here's a couple of stats for you to think about in terms of new media. Facebook has 1.1 billion users. Half of those log in every day. That's a giant audience. Some of you are probably using it right now. No, you're listening to me. I know. You're not using it. How about Twitter? Do you know there are 400 million unique tweets every day? 400 million every day. How about YouTube? Each month, people around the world watch over 6 billion hours of video on YouTube. Staggering, isn't it? Staggering. The tools we have now, if we don't use them, we're not acting as Elijah. If we allow the priests of Baal and the new atheists to get control of this world, you know what's fascinating to me? The studies being done now on atheism among young kids, the overwhelming majority of those who become atheists through the internet. And again, Hitchens, Dawkins, Sam Harris, all those guys, great evangelists, and they've used this tool. We got to be in there, everybody. We've got to be in that world and battling them. I'll just give you one story about this, and I'll stop. A couple years ago, I got a letter from this young woman, and she said that she hated the Catholic Church, hated Catholic priests. But one night she was Googling during the Charlie Sheen period when Charlie's having his meltdown. Remember that a couple years ago? And she got some website about him. And that led her to Martin Sheen, Charlie's dad. And that led her to Fulton Sheen, because Martin Sheen took his name from Fulton Sheen. And then Fulton Sheen led her to Catholic preachers, which then led her to my website. And she started watching, some videos and all this, and then she told me she's now in RCIA becoming a Catholic. Now, it's great, yeah. First of all, please trust me, it does not happen every day. That's unusual. Most people are attacking me on YouTube, But I remember when I got that letter, I thought, well, Lord, if you can use Charlie Sheen for your purposes, who am I to stand in the way? But see, that's the power, isn't it? We all know that. That's the power of this world. And so we've got to get into it, I think, to do the new evangelization well. So I'll close this with that quote again from John Paul II. The new evangelization is the old evangelization. That means declaring the lordship of Jesus Christ. It's the same message in season and out. It's Paul's message. It's our message today. But it's new how? It's new in expression. It's new in method. And finally, it's new in ardor. And again, look at this room. We channel the ardor in this room. We can indeed set the world on fire. God bless you all. Thanks.
Well, thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Word on Fire show. We have a great show planned for you next week. Bishop Barron will be back in the studio to answer many of your listener questions. We're going to take several of them rapid fire. If you have a question, we'd love to hear it. Just visit askbishopbarron.com, and there you can record your question on any internet-enabled device. That means any computer, any phone, any tablet, whatever your device, whatever your question, we want to hear it. So visit askbishopbarron.com. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next week on the Word on Fire show.